too late, but my name is Dr. Sylvia Lloyd, and I'm the author of the Pandemic Preparedness Guide for School Administrators. And I am here today with award-winning author, Dr. Gholdy Muhammad. Welcome.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Sylvia. It's so nice.
You're so humble. So before we start, I'm just going to give you a little introduction here. So Dr. Gholdy Muhammad, for those who don't know or not familiar, is an associate professor of language and literacy at Georgia State University. Mm-hmm. She's the author of the popular book, Cultivating Genius, an equity framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy. And Dr. Muhammad's scholarship has appeared in leading educational journals and books, and some of her recognitions include the 2014 recipient of the National Council of Teachers of English, or NCTE, Promising New Researcher Award, the 2016 NCTE Janet Emig Award, the 2017 Georgia State University Urban Education Research Award, the 2018 University of Illinois at Chicago College of Education Researcher of the Year Award, the 2020 American Educational Research Association Division K Early Career Awardee, and most recently, the 2021 NCTE Outstanding Elementary Educator in the English Language Arts Award. So congratulations, Dr. Muhammad. And she's also the director of the Georgia State University Urban Literacy Collaborative and Clinic. And she works with teachers, leaders, parents, and young people across the United States and South Africa. So that's awesome. Okay, people are trying to chime in now. So what?
Okay, also, before you get started, it says, can you also share with me the link so I can share it to my page, and then that way people can, my folks can listen to.
Okay, so I
don't know where it is.
I'm gonna put it in the chat. So okay. The link is on my Facebook page, which is Dr. Sylvia Lloyd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm there. I just don't see it. I don't see your live.
It should be right on my page. Let me check Facebook. Hold on. Let me check Facebook. So I know we are. Yep, I'm on Facebook now, and I see us on there.
Okay, you can just copy the link, and because it's not coming in on my my side.
Okay, sure. Hold on.
Just your YouTube channel page.
Yepper.
Oh no, that's something different. If not, it's okay. We can just go ahead and get started. I know we folks may be listening in.
Okay, here, nope, I have it right here. So I'm gonna put it right in the chat. Just gonna paste it and then, okay, there, boom, it's there. Okay, so we're gonna start from the beginning. So growing up in Gary, Indiana, so you're from Gary, Indiana, and which is the home of the Jacksons, correct?
Yeah.
How did your parents get to Gary, Indiana?
Well, my dad, my mother is from there, just like I am. And she was born and raised there. And my father is from Iran. He's not from the United States.
Oh.
And but they met in Chicago. So yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. So your father is a first year immigrant, or first generation immigrant?
Yeah, he brought over his siblings and his parents, my grandparents here, and one at a time, sort of. He sort of just worked and worked hard to bring his people over.
Wow, that's an amazing story. So Gary, Indiana is also huge Klan territory. At its peak, the Ku Klux Klan counted among its members the governor of Indiana and more than half of the state legislature, and an estimated 30% of all native-born white men in the state. So did your parents experience any racism or discrimination there?
So Gary, Indiana is very Black. The Klan is really around the state of Indiana. You know, so, I grew up around Black people and Blackness in Gary and Islam in Gary, Indiana. So I did not experience the Klan in Indiana. I think if I might have gone outside of the city, in other cities within the state, I probably would have. But, by that time, when my parents, they had moved to, they met in Chicago, so.
Okay. So that answers my second question. I was going to ask you if you ever experienced any oppression on an individual level and on a systemic level. So you said individually, not really. There wasn't really too much.
In Gary, no. I mean, Gary, I had Black teachers, Black friends, Black folks at the masjid. And so when I was a child, no, although, in my school, I did have a good number of white women teachers. At that point, I could not remember experiencing any kind of marginalization or racism from my teachers. So no, it wasn't until I moved to the suburbs outside of Chicago where I experienced that kind of stuff.
Interesting. And when did you leave Gary, Indiana? When did you leave Chicago?
I moved out like maybe the end of my elementary years into middle school.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. That's a different experience.
Yeah, and that's when I experienced a different kind of curriculum where I didn't see myself. I didn't experience the kind of teachers who loved me the same, like in Gary. It was a shift. I was one of the only Black children in the class. A lot of times we think sometimes that when we move to different socioeconomic environments that all of a sudden it is going to be a better education, but that was not my case.
Wow. That's very interesting. So that experience, it sounds like it probably shaped the route that you went, the way that you ended up in education. Did that have anything to do with it? Like, how did you become a teacher?
Being a teacher has always been inside of me. I would want to teach at an early age, play school, like teach my brother, who was older than me, but I made him sit in my class. And, I would also write curriculum and lesson plans, what I now know to be curriculum and lesson plans at an early age. And so, I just feel like it was never really, it was a choice as I got older, but it was more so a calling. And so there are things that I remember very specifically that my teachers done really well. And then later, there are things that I remember very specifically that my teachers have done not so well. And I've always used that as the means, as the energy, as my motivation sort of to think about what kind of teacher I wanted to be. And so I've always remembered loving teaching and wanting and desiring and like wishing to be a teacher. That was my dream job. Wow. And it still is. Yeah.
So your framework, we're not really going to talk about the framework in depth yet, because I have a few questions before we get to the framework. But your framework, like how does it help Black children, like yourself? You said you kind of felt invisible when you moved into that suburban school district. how does it help Black and Brown children to learn about themselves in a different way that they don't do currently in the current school system?
Well, a framework is just a framework. It's not going to be the magic cure. You have to teach the framework well. I mean, you can have a good plan, a good design, but without teaching the framework well and moving forward with excellent practices for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and for white children, for all children, you just have that. But what the framework does is it reduces the opportunity to teach in deficit ways for teachers. And so it centers youth identities, their racial, cultural, other identities. We're so multi-layered when it comes to who we are. It centers who they are. And I think for Black children, this is especially important because the world has told us that we're not beautiful enough, has politicized our bodies, our hair, our skin tones, our everything.
Yes.
And so we must see ourselves represented as genius in joyful ways and beautiful and brilliant. And we must discover who we are. We should not have to wait to adulthood. It should happen in K-12. And so the model also looks at skill development and intellectualism and criticality. Our children need to know how to navigate racism, sexism, homophobia, and other types of harms in this world. Not just to understand it and navigate it, but to disrupt it and interrupt it. We are trying to help to cultivate a more humane human. And the last one is joy. In US public schools, it wasn't really designed for children who had come up from enslavement to have joy. And so this is why we have to be more intentional about it. And I think if I would have had this model throughout my K-12 experiences, I would not have had to play catch up so much, in my education, in my identity development, in my criticality.
Right. Absolutely. And we'll go further deeper into the framework in a little bit. But before we shift, I want to talk about the coronavirus shutdown. When schools open back up in the fall, how do we catch kids back up? Because many of them had almost 2 years away from the classroom. And we saw how the system responded. They did away with the regents and they did away with standardized tests and they distributed laptops to everyone. However, our kids still suffered disproportionately. So how do we help the lowest amongst us? And how do we catch them up academically?
So I would argue that all of us did not suffer or struggle because of this. I know some children, Black children, who have thrived more virtually than they did in person. So I think we have to really think about this idea of loss. We were at a loss before the pandemic in person. We were not doing right by our children. And so nobody talks about that loss. That's the loss I'm trying to hit at. Yes, the pandemic switched things and we had to now move into virtual learning and students experience joy loss, but they have been experiencing learning loss and joy loss for years in a system that was never designed to educate them well with excellence. So right. What do? We do what our ancestors told us to do in the 1800s. And that's what I keep saying. But people need to let go of capitalism and profiting off of Black and brown failure. That's what we do. I don't really spend a lot of time and attention talking about learning loss because the system has been at a loss since the 1600s. And until we address that, there's no point to me of addressing what happened in this last year. Now, the question is, when we come back, how will we come back? Did we learn something in this year? Did we relearn and unlearn? See, the teachers I work with, they have unlearned some stuff. They have learned some stuff and relearned some stuff. And what you do with that is important. that makes the difference, because if you learn something and unlearn something and you come back still doing the same testing and pressures on testing, still doing the same inadequate curriculum, then shame on you. That's all. That's what it is. And so, you know, it's going to be a loss until the systems of education improve.
And that's where I want to ask you about abolitionists. You're an abolitionist, and it kind of sounds like you're alluding to that when you say the system, you know, we tried all of these reforms and, you know, we may just go back into doing the same old thing. So how do we abolish the system instead of reforming the system? What does abolishing the system look like?
Well, foremost, I'm a Muslim. By nature, I'm an abolitionist because I'm a Muslim. That's in our nature. That's the first thing. You know, if we're going to abolish the system, we have to look at, there's so many moving parts, but I always speak to 5 different connecting parts. The first is teacher education programs at the university level. We have to change how we prepare teachers to teach. We don't prepare them, and some programs do a beautiful job. I'm not saying that this is everywhere, but some programs don't. And some programs are somewhere in the middle. Some programs are still teaching, you know, white theorists heavily and not enough about Black and brown people. Right. There are not classes where you learn a whole class to become a teacher on Black historical education. That needs to be in every single program. So that's what you do. You change these programs, you add to them, you modify them. That means bringing in professors who are conscious, who are community engaged scholars, who are not just writing articles and publishing in journals, but are in communities helping to be better themselves and make communities better. The second part of the system that needs some change is this Common Core standards. You know, I think people don't want to give these up. You need to rewrite them to be equitable. Teachers they're still written in ways where teachers can teach those standards in deficit ways. That's a problem.
Yes.
You got to abolish the standards and rewrite them and change them up. And there's some standards you might be able to keep, but you need to add to them. The third area is the curriculum. The curriculum is largely incomplete. It's getting better, some programs, some companies, but it still needs a lot of work. The fourth area is the state exam. We are not screening what we need. We are not collecting equity data from the students. Equity data means that you're collecting data and measuring students' progress on identity development, skill development, intellectualism, criticality, and joy. We only screen on one of those skills. And then the fifth one is teacher evaluation. If teachers are not being evaluated on teaching anti-racism and justice and liberation and equity, why would they do it if they don't want to? You know, we got teachers that do it naturally, but we need to mandate justice. That's how you move to abolitionist systems in education. We've mandated everybody else. A lot of white theories, a lot of white frameworks written by white authors that simply, and I wouldn't complain about them if those theories were written to center the genius and joy of Black children, the group of students we're struggling to get it right with the most. But as long as they're not excellent enough for our babies. It's that simple.
Thank you. So your research, so we touched on your research a little bit. The framework has 4 components: skills, intellectualism, identity, and criticality. But what was that?
Enjoy.
Oh, enjoy. So you added another component?
Yeah, I saw that during the pandemic, it became worse than joy. People talk about learning loss. It was a joy loss, not just for students, but for teachers.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I talk about joy in the book, but it became more of a prominent pursuit because I thought joy was natural. I thought people just taught with joy, but some teachers were not showing up with joy, and they were not elevating beauty in Blackness and brownness and indigenous people.
That's
That's why I
interesting.
was at it.
Oh, I love it. Okay. So we're going to focus on identity and criticality, because as you mentioned, skills is overdone. We're doing skills heavily. It's kind of disproportionately done. Intellectualism is kind of self-explanatory. However, identity and criticality seem to be the most important for our children. So in the book, you say that criticality is the capacity and ability to read, write, think, and speak in ways to understand power and equity in order to understand and promote anti-oppression. So can you like break that down? You know, like what does that mean?
So I never say that skills are overdone. I teach skills. I just equally teach identity, intellect, criticality, and joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say that as long as oppression exists in the world, we need spaces for criticality. Criticality helps to teach the more humane child to grow up to make decisions where they're not passive consumers of information. They question, they critique the world to make the best decisions for themselves, but also for the sake of humanity. Criticality is a selfless something. And without criticality, we have the potential to be very selfish human beings, and that's not going to help the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean by, the quote of criticality is helping students to navigate and understand oppression, and to promote anything, to teach in ways where students understand power and justice and how it plays in the history of racism and how it plays out. That's what I will believe that will build a better humanity for all.
And what about identity? How is that, like, how did it make itself into your framework? Like, why is that in the framework?
Well, all of these things made their way into the framework because our Black ancestors had these same pursuits. And so this is what they gave us as the roadmap. They said every time they were reading and writing and learning, they were making sense of who they are. That's identity. They were learning about the lives of other people internationally, domestically. That's identity. And so learning for Black people, it was not learning over here and identity meaning making over here. That's not who Black people are. As we were learning and cultivating our skills and our proficiencies and our intellectualism, we were learning who we are, who we're not, who we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so intricate to the educational development of Blackness. And it's so special that every child deserves that.
Does curriculum and instruction today help us to understand power, equity, and anti-oppression?
Does the education system today?
Yes.
The way the system is written, no. Teachers who go above and beyond the system of education, yes. But is it the norm? No.
Yeah.
Social political consciousness is not the norm. And, we've had researchers, James Banks and Glory Lasting Billings and Bettina Love, all throughout time, who have been saying that this needs to be center in education. And it just simply has not. It has not been mandated. It has just been encouraged in rhetoric.
That's so true. That's so true. And it's like, again, more reforms, more rhetoric, and the same people remain marginalized. So I'm a researcher and I'm a librarian, a former librarian. So I'm wondering, how did you, when you were doing your research, how did you identify, how did you locate the Black literary societies? Like, were you looking through microfiche or were you online?
I took a class that studied the historical literacy development of Black boys at the time, Black males. And I was interested in literacy groups and literacy collaboratives. And my advisor said, okay, well, pointed me to Elizabeth McHenry's work, who wrote the book Forgotten Readers. And it was a book on the lost history of African-American literary societies. And it's not really lost. It was easy to find. They're not really forgotten. They're forgotten by certain people, but it's not, nobody knew, nobody taught, folks weren't teaching Black literary societies in K-12 education. It wasn't really in the curriculum. It wasn't really in teacher education programs.
Right.
So from her work and from work like, Jacqueline Jones Royster, she's also someone I admire greatly. I would start to, and like Maisha Wynn and folks, I would start to go to the microfiche, go to the Black newspapers, go through archives and archival websites. All this stuff is here. It's plentiful.
Yes.
And I would just study it and learn it. And I was in grad school at this time.
Fascinating.
And I wrote a dissertation about it. Mm-hmm.
In your research, did you find any information about how that environment led to those literacy societies? Like the environment in the 1800s, people were just coming out of slavery at the time. Like what led them to literary societies?
Well, during this time, folks were still enslaved, brothers and sisters in the South. The literary societies happened in where a lot of the abolitionist movements were happening in the Northeast part of the country, like New York and Boston and Philadelphia and places like that. And, the Black folks there had some liberties, some freedoms, but they weren't fully free. Nobody was fully free. They still had laws. You were caught distributing, the David Walker's Appeal and other types of protest literature that empowered Black folks. You could be killed. And so we were not free. We just had some liberties to organize, and that's what we did. We organized and we cultivated our libraries and our books, and we had membership dues, and we organized around all those 5 pursuits, around mathematics and science and history and language. And we knew that if we cultivated our minds around those 5 areas, that we would be in position to help brothers and sisters and to help ourselves toward mental freedom and physical freedom, so that we could have the power and the self-determination and the self-reliance and the self-empowerment that was so long due and owed to us. That was the goal. So they met in basements and churches and homes and auditoriums. They met in places where they could gather to build, and they enjoyed literature and reading and writing, much like Black folks do today.
That's what I was going to ask you. Like, how can we get back to that? Like, do you think that's something we can get back to today?
It never left. All you got to do is talk to Black people. It never left us. See, that's the perspective of whiteness telling us, how can we get back? This is who we are. This is who we are then. This is who we are today. How can they get back to honoring it is the real question. It's always been here.
Hence the need for your framework, but our children need your framework so that they can learn those skills. They can learn how to be critical, how to be, to learn their identity through literature.
Well, I mean, my framework is not the first, and it won't be the last. They've had, before my framework in 1933, they had Carter G. Woodson's framework. Before my framework, they had Mary McLeod Bethune framework. that you got all the frameworks. That's not the problem. So folks need to learn who we are and actually move toward action. And stop relying on institutions to teach you. Teach yourself. That's what our people taught us.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's what Carter G. Woodson said too. Don't let someone else teach your children. Especially, you know, back then, the enemy, you know, someone who believed in white supremacy. You know, why would you send your child to be taught by that person? So another question I had for you is when your interview with Dr. Brian Jones, who is the executive director of education for the Schoenberg Center, you said one of your freedom dreams is to be the United States Secretary of Education, and that's one of your aspirations. So how would you roll out your framework in school districts around the country if you were the Secretary of Education?
Well, you know, the framework is already being adopted and rolled out across the country. But as Secretary of Education, the first thing I would do is write a curriculum that is free and that helps students to get free. There's no reason to go broke on curriculum. It should be free. Knowledge should be free. You know, we already pay for private schools and universities. Why can't we have free curriculum? And I will roll out a curriculum that is not just designed in Eurocentricity, but that's designed with the needs and the genius and the joy of Black, Indigenous people of color. I would change the standards. I think my plan for Secretary of Education is quite clear. I would rewrite the Common Core standards so that they were common and at the core for all children and not just some. I would change plans for adopting certain teacher evaluations, provide more districts with supports that were equitable tools, like an evaluation where we are observing and evaluating for equity. I would change the test. Until that test is more excellent, it goes away. I would assess what I value. We are assessing skills. We need to value more than skills because you need more skills and you need more than just skills in life. You need social emotional learning. You need identity development. You need to know people who are different than you so you know how to treat them. You need to know anti-sexism, anti-racism, anti-homophobia, religious discrimination. You need to know these things and I would assess it. I can assess anything. So after changing those things, that would be, I would change and make requirement courses in teacher education and hold folks accountable in their strategic plans, in their reports at the state level, at district levels for this kind of work. I would mandate justice. It's that clear. It's simple to me.
Right.
The fact that it's 2021 and we have not done this is a bit, and I'm not saying it's easy. I don't care if it's easy or difficult. It's possible. That all I care about is possibility. We have too many geniuses in the country, in the United States. There are some minds that, you know, I'm just like blown away by, you know, and so how do you have all that genius contained in this country and we don't know what to do?
Yeah. That's something. So your book is wildly popular. You're a hot commodity. You're killing it. So when you go to these school districts, like what is your approach when you meet with various school districts and what is your goals? What are your goals?
It depends. I listen to them. I listen to their students. I listen to their teachers. I listen to their leaders and I ask them what their goals are. I try to support them and love them and make it impossible for them to fail at teaching Black, Indigenous, children of color excellently. That's my goal. Because if you teach them more excellently, you're teaching every other child too, in all the intersections of every child's identity. So I support them with anything they need. I do. I mean, it can be interview questions. It could be lesson plan templates, anything they complain about, I work on it. So
And
some of the things, huh?
How do you measure success? If you were
Success.
successful in the district, or how do you make the school district more successful?
So it depends on how you define success. If it's talking about my model, I assess the 5 areas. I assess through interviews, focus groups, surveys, quantitative assessments, and qualitative ones.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I do a lot of professional learning for teachers. So I'm assessing the quality of what they're learning from me as their teacher, because it's almost like I'm a teacher educator too in that way, right? So I assess their own learning, and I assess it through their, I go in and observe, like my grant, I got a grant where I do this work. I go in and observe their classroom. I assess their teaching. I have a framework, an observational and evaluation framework for my model. I go in and I read and evaluate their lesson plans, just like principals would do. That's what I do. That's how you assess if they're able to do it. You assess students' achievement. So I make it sound easy because it is. But you got to be on code. Everybody. The reason why it feels so hard, because some teachers want it, some teachers don't. Some principals promote it, some principals don't. And sometimes superintendents become neutral on it. That's not how you get work done. You all have to be on the same page. And it cannot just be in rhetoric. It cannot just be in a Saturday program or after school program. It has to be in the core curriculum that you use every day. But when you study a lot of the core curriculum schools adopt, it's not as conscious.
Right. Interesting. And how has this all changed your life?
How has what?
How has this changed your life? Like, you're a hot commodity, you know, I know you're in New York City. You're in New York City, you're in the Bronx, you're in Buffalo Public Schools. Has this changed your life? You know, the success of your framework?
You know, I don't think I would ever consider myself a hot commodity. I'm just an educator, I'm a sister, I'm a teacher. And so,
okay,
you know, sure, more people know me because they're buying the book. I guess it's making me a little busier. You know, folks are emailing me a lot more and asking, you know, sometimes superintendents want to talk and they have struggles and breakdowns and they don't know what to do. And teachers call me and email me and they have struggles and they don't know what to do. And, you know, I would reach out. I respond to everybody. And so, and I will never forget what it felt like to struggle in this work. And I still struggle through this work. So I try to remain grounded in this work like that. But you know, I'm saying the same things I've been saying over the last 10 years, and I'm saying them better and stronger for sure. And you know, I just continue to learn. So the beautiful part is being in company of so many teacher geniuses. I get to learn mathematics and science. I teach math and science, and I'm an ELA social studies teacher. You know, I learn so much and I gain so much. And so if anything, I have changed. I've changed in my mind, and my heart is even stronger than what it was yesterday. So that's really the main change.
Aww.
You know, and I have more folks in my village, because you know, you meet good sisters and brothers doing this work, and you know, that's a beautiful thing.
Speaking of good sisters and brothers, I'm a member of Black Influencers United, or BU, and I sit on the capacity committee where we try to, you know, build capacity amongst teachers, Black teachers, you know, inspire Black educators. So if you were to give next steps to new teachers, principals, or superintendents who recognize that, you know, there is systemic racism, that leads to the school to prison pipeline. And the system kind of demands that, teachers conform to the system, to systemic racism, basically. So how can they fight against the system?
Well, if you think, I don't think anybody is forced to it. I think it's a choice. I would just ask for next steps, you need to know who you are, brother and sister. Are you going to keep saying that the system is forcing you to do something? Are you going to do what's right by children and their families? That's the only thing. That's really the only thing. James Baldwin said this. He says, y'all need to be willing to go for broke. He says, who are you accountable to? The system? Y'all cannot even name people in the system. Folks don't even know who wrote the Common Core. I say, tell me their names and read to me their background. They're like, I don't know. It's like some kind of imaginary something.
Wow.
So we have one purpose: to serve children and their families. By cultivating the genius and joy and criticality, my model gives you the means. So what else do you need? Now, if you are a legislator, funder, you have some influence, then you have perhaps a different responsibility. How can you use your influence on different levels to change this? So that's why when people hear me in interviews, they hear me say the same things, because I am staying on code with what we need to do to change schools for children. And if I say it enough, maybe it'll start to stick and people will hear it. And maybe I get into the ears of the Secretary of Education or state superintendents. But people gotta dismantle two things. Your next steps are two things: to dismantle ignorance and fear. Educate yourself, and then ask yourself, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? And if you are not that person all our parents need for their babies, then you must step to the side or let somebody else teach if you cannot do this work, because we only need the brightest and the most conscious among us to teach children and to lead teachers.
Absolutely. So this is my last question. It's kind of a question, but it's kind of more informative for tonight. So we only have 10 minutes left. Okay, so we know that in New York City, there's been a big shift in restorative practices, implicit bias training, culturally relevant, sustaining education. And there's been a big shift to teach from the culture of the kids, where the kids come from. So with all of that, there's also new research. So I'm not sure if you heard of this new research coming from the medical field called structural competency, where they're taking culturally responsive to the next level. And they're saying that it's not enough to just be culturally competent, because what they're doing now is they're having medical students take a social issue from that community, and they kind of become learners with the students, and they learn how to fight against the structures that exist, in the medical field.
But that's culturally relevant teaching. That is already in the definition. Gloria Ladson-Billings said that in the 90s.
Say that again.
That is culturally relevant or culturally responsive teaching. Gloria Ladson-Billings said that in the 90s, that's what it should be about. Breaking down those structures and studying critical race theory, that's not a shift. It's the same thing. That doesn't add to it.
So how do we fight? And here's the question: how do we fight against the structures that exist?
Give me an example of a structure that exists, and I'll tell you how to fight it. Because I said all the structures and how to change them. So tell me, what do you think they are?
Okay, so for in the medical field, so this model, is happening in the medical field. So we know that with the coronavirus, Black people, let's say, had food insecurities. They had higher incidence of like high blood pressure, diabetes, because of structures in the system that kind of prevent them from getting good food, or learning about good food, or making healthy choices, or exercising, in healthcare. So if we think about education, you mentioned some of the structures in education, that like the school to prison pipeline, the testing, the discrimination in disciplinary policies, for Black kids, things like that that are in place that kind of cause more Black kids to maybe drop out of school, or not be proficient readers by the end of third grade, which is how they decide how many prisons to build, things like that, structures in the Black community. So how do we like fight against those structures in the Black community?
So you got to keep in mind.
Question. I'm sorry.
We give reparations. That's what it is. That's an easy answer. You give folks reparations. Of course, we're going to have gaps in healthcare and education, because you created a system for gaps to take place, for disparities to take place. Why are we not expecting it? Until you do right by a group of people who you have systemically harmed, and until you give them what they need, you're going to have this. You should almost expect it. Of course, it's going to be in the healthcare system. It's going to be in every facet of education. As long as capitalism is king and people's humanity is lower, the amount that it costs to take care of yourself and to heal from a disease that history has caused, folks throughout history have caused, and now I got to pay for it. I got to pay for it through mental health and all kind of hospital bills. Listen, until society gets right, our schools will get right. But if there's an erasure of people's humanity in society, it's going to be an erasure in the healthcare field. It's going to be an erasure in schools. And so what you're asking, this is why we need presidents and leaders that actually put Black people first. Mm-hmm. In our reparations and our healing, give folks education, give them it. All you got to do is write a better curriculum. That's reparations. Y'all, you with me?
Right.
That is a part of reparations. That's one part of it, but it's a part of it. Why can't we do that? Why won't we do it?
Right.
Giving folks opportunities and real access to jobs, and through policies and laws where you cannot just kill us. That's reparations. Making sure that you cannot discriminate on somebody because of their hair, or because a little boy is walking home, that you cannot kill him and get away with it. That is reparations. Listen, folks are not serious enough about Black and brown lives and Indigenous lives. So where do you start? You need to get your heart right. And how do you get your heart right? Listen, that's a whole new other interview. But you have to know why we are in the place that we can. And folks who govern laws, folks who make laws, folks who create change and all these like legislative and systemic things, folks who are the chancellors and superintendents of schools and principals of schools, see, they can start doing some stuff right now, even in spite of the system that we have.
Yes, absolutely. So we're gonna remain hopeful, that does happen. So you have
we have to we have to remain something. I don't know what it is, but to keep doing this work every day, I wake up and I do it again, and I try again, and I try again, because and folks call it hope, folks call it something, but what keeps me going is the children and their families, and the beautiful teachers I work with. When I see that I have folks who want this too. Like, we need each other. And sometimes the hope is like, we gonna make it through today, and then we're gonna try again tomorrow. That's what we have to do every single day until we start to see some change. I'm seeing change already in schools that are using my model. They are teaching in ways that they just haven't taught in the past. I'll take all the little and big progress.
Yes, yes. Oh, awesome. You have been so gracious to jump on live with me. I'm so thankful and grateful to meet you. And, you know, I read your book and I'm going to go back and reread it. You know, there's so much to continue to learn, and especially through the lens of joy that you added, you know, and that came straight from the field. You know, you out there, you know, in the districts, on the front lines, talking to people. That's what you saw. That's what you observed. And thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for your time.
Because
and
I appreciate you.
I hope that we can chat again sometime.
Yes, me too.
All right.
And make sure you share this with me. I still couldn't find the link.
Absolutely.
But share it with me. I'll share it out too. I think folks will be happy to hear our engagement and our discussion.
Definitely. I'll do that. Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you again. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Here. Bye.
Bye.